Welcome everybody! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and today is, once again, Hobbit Hump Day. So, welcome! We are going to be reading The Hobbit, chapters 8 and 9 today. Started the stream a little later than expected because I actually needed breakfast this morning. Trying to not skip meals. How about that? Good morning. Good morning over on TikTok. If you guys have a moment, please switch over to my YouTube channel. Channel name is the same as it is here on TikTok, but it's a better experience over there, and that's where I need the minutes watched, honestly. TikTok doesn't pay me. You'll also notice something a little different about today is I'm wearing these headphones instead of my big muffs. That is because my muffs decided to go dead right when I was setting up for the stream. Whoops. So we're going old school with these going down to my computer, which means I can't move too much. But we do what we must, right? So let's see here. Okay. Just altering... Yeah, just altering my volume through my headphones, because these are much louder than my normal headphones. But hopefully everybody's feeling good today. We're going to take Bilbo et al., Bilbo and his friends, Bilbo and friends, we're going to get him through Mirkwood today. So we will be reading Chapter 8, which is Flies and Spiders, and Chapter 9, which is Barrels Out of Bond. So this will give us our first look at Thranduil, the Elven King. It's not a very flattering look at Thranduil. But we're going to cover Mirkwood today. And this, I remember this part of the story, like, being so intriguing to me when I was younger. Like, younger as in high school. I didn't read The Hobbit until I was in high school. But I remember reading it and just being like, dude, like, the path through the forest with the spiders and stuff. It always seemed especially creepy because I hate spiders. They're great and they do a good thing and, like, they serve a purpose ecologically speaking, but there are rules. There are rules for me to cohabitate with spiders, and the rules are thus: 1, don't crawl in my bed. Like, you better not. Hell no. And 2, no dangling. No dangling allowed. Of course, my sister, they were just like, no, when they're dangling, like, that's when they're vulnerable and you can just sort of put your finger on the string that they're dangling from and just put them wherever you want them to go. I was like, nope. Nope. There shall be no dangling. 0 dangling allowed. Which is why that one scene in, what is it, Harry Potter Chamber of Secrets, where they go into the forest and Aragog is like, you know, oh, all my children are hungry, and they're all like dangling from the top. I was like, nope. Nope, I'm out. I am out. It's fine when they're crawling. I still don't like them, but, like, I'll let them live. But if they dangle, they did. And if they're in my bed, they did. Absolutely 100% killing any spider that's in my bed. Or, like, where I'm resting, so, like, on the couch with me or something. They don't get up in my space, I don't get up in their space. No dangling, and no being where I'm sleeping. Okay, thanks, bye. Shelob spawn, I know, gosh. And I do recognize before we even get started with Shelob. I say Shelob because it's how it would be said in Elvish, but I believe Shelob was not named anything that translates in Elvish, so it may very well not be pronounced Shelob. It's probably Shelob. But I want to reiterate that I am not a huge pronunciation Nazi, okay? Like, I try to do my best, but I'm not so obsessed with it that, like, I want everybody to correct me. Hey, thank you so much for coming over, Sarah. I appreciate you guys. Okay, so, since we're starting a little bit late, let's jump right in. The last time we read, so last Wednesday, we covered Bilbo being out of the Misty Mountains, because we had finished with Riddles in the Dark, so we took Bilbo to the Karak, which is like a hill, and from there, he and the dwarves were guided by Gandalf to the House of Beorn. Beorn, who is a shapeshifter, takes the form of a bear. And that was our queer lodgings chapter. Speaking of queer, what a non sequitur. Speaking of queer, we're coming up on Pride Month in next week, and I didn't have any Pride Month merch ideas until yesterday because Callie Cosplay over on TikTok, love you, Callie, was just like, poke, do you have Pride merch? You're queer. And I was like, yes, I am queer, and no, I don't have ideas, and like, I've got a week, I could come up with something if I had a little help. And she hooked me up with their Discord server. Their Discord server as in hers, New Betta Do Bettas, and Onyx Wilson. Like, all three of them are on the same Discord. It's amazing. I'm just, like, Discord illiterate. And I get overwhelmed too easily, but she hooked me up on Discord, and we came up with a really good merch idea. So, between that and 2 other ideas I had in the last 24 hours, there will be 3. There will be 3 Pride Month merchandise lines, okay? They're not gonna be super colorful. I'm not doing anything rainbow or stuff like that. Though, maybe. I typically try to stay away from colored stuff so that you can choose a shirt color of any color and have it make sense. So that you can choose whatever color of shirt you want, rather than it only looking good on black or white. So, as I finalize the designs tomorrow, which is what I'm doing all day tomorrow, as I finalize everything, if I can easily work in rainbow stuff, I will. But if it's just not coming together, then it won't, and that's okay. I'm excited though. So thank you to everyone over on the Discord server for coming together and giving me some help, because proceeds from all of my Pride merch are going to go toward top surgery. So you are directly benefiting a trans person who's part of the community. I also do have a piece of merch that is over on Don Marshall's shop. We sort of had the same idea for Pride. And, so my idea just sort of got absorbed into his idea, and it became his merch thing. So I did the Elvish translation for his merch, and a portion of that is also supporting me directly. So I'm not saying don't buy Don's merch, buy mine instead. I'm just saying you have options, and all of them benefit me, so it's okay. Whichever designs you like best, you can go with that if you've got the money to spare, and that is all. Thank you very much. Hi, Bunny. I'm doing okay. Just pimping out the merch a little bit. I don't have it on. I'm wearing my Tingle Slut shirt instead, which you can't even see on the camera over here. Just says Tingle Slut. Shout out to ASMR Punk over on Twitch. This is his merch. I couldn't say no to it. I'm like, Tingle Slut, that's perfect for ASMR. I'm gonna use that. I will be putting out a design probably in a couple months that is... My kink is elvish. So, there's that too. I'm having fun with merch stuff. And so, yeah. I did manage 3 designs in the last 24 hours that I will be finalizing tomorrow. So there will be Pride Month merch. Yay! Like, insert the little cheering... the cheering sound. But that is all. Without further ado, let's get into the reading. Once again, before I start, anybody who's still over on TikTok, please make the switch over to my YouTube channel. It's where I need the minutes watched, so if you can support me over there, that is amazing, and I thank you for it. Thank you! Alright, let's get started. As always, I need to hydrate. I have to remind myself to hydrate. Okay. Okay. Let's settle in. Let's get these guys through Mirkwood. We got this. Chapter 8. Flies and Spiders. They walked in single file. The entrance to the path was like a sort of arch leading into a gloomy tunnel made by 2 great trees that linked together, too old and strangled with ivy and hung with lichen to bear more than a few blackened leaves. The path itself was narrow and wound in and out among the trunks. Soon the light at the gate was like a little bright hole far behind, and the quiet was so deep that their feet seemed to thump along while all the trees leaned over them and listened. And pardon me, because I am really not liking... I'm not liking the way my own voice sounds in my head with these particular headphones. It's really loud. So, okay, no headphones. No headphones this time. If anything crazy with the audio happens, please let me know in chat. Because I'm putting these aside. I don't like it. I'll have my normal headphones back next stream. I'm like, this is not working. It's distracting. I was having issues focusing on the words. Alright. So, it's dark. Basically. It's very gloomy, and these trees are very heavy and leaning over the path. So you can imagine it's going to get dark very quickly. This is why it's called Hwinglad. This is Mirkwood. Because everything gets murky. Oh, and here he is. You're early, Gray. You're early in the stream.
Yeah, what are you doing? Hey. What?
Gray. There's always a cat interruption. We might as well get it out of the way.
Hello? Hey, come over here.
He's like, no!
Come here.
There you go, see? Yeah, I know you want the cuddle, so you're gonna get the cuddle. Or you're just gonna crawl all over me.
Hey, what are you doing? Gray. What?
Bonk. Oh, I love my cat. Hi. Is this what you want? Yeah, this is what you want. Gray's like, I love Tolkien and I love you.
I love you too, Gray.
You're messing with all the cameras, though.
Get over here. Gray.
Come on. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is typical. Bookmark down.
Gray. Come here. What? What are you gonna do about it? Huh? What are you gonna do about it?
He walks into, like, the very corner of my desk, and then he won't move.
Gray! You gotta turn around, silly. Come here. Thank you. There we go. Hello, sweet boy. Hi. You're a good boy. Hi. Oh my gosh, all the nuzzles. You're so sweet. So this is Gray. He's my thick boy. You're my thick boy.
As you can see on camera, he is a dark gray cat. And he is shedding, my word.
Gray. You're gonna have to leave me to my stream, Gray. You're gonna have to. Uh-huh. Okay. Gray, go on. Down you go.
Thank you. Okay. Alright. Cat visit has happened. He will probably leave me alone the rest of the stream, but we'll see. Alrighty. He is such a cutie. He's got these really beautiful bright green eyes. Ugh. I love him. I love him to death. He is the sweetest. But he always comes in the morning-ish, not like early morning. Early morning, he's in the sunbeams in the living room, like, nothing will make him budge. But in the morning, once I'm awake, he comes in and he wants a lot of cuddles, and then he goes and does his own thing. So, of course, when I wake up, have breakfast, and immediately go to stream, he's like, hey, cuddles. We have a routine. The fuck? So, he's super sweet. He just wanted his cuddles. You're a good boy, Gray. Alright. Now that I have fur all over me and in my eyes, let's continue. So, we're going into Mirkwood. Let's get going. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see a little way to either side in a sort of darkened green glimmer. Occasionally, a slender beam of sun that had the luck to slip in through some opening in the leaves far above, and still more luck in not being caught in the tangled boughs and matted twigs beneath, stabbed down thin and bright before them. But this was seldom, and it soon ceased altogether. So the canopy is thick. She thick boy. Cuddle routines. Absolutely. Cats are creatures of habit. Don't establish a routine and then deviate from it. They're gonna be like, what the hell? So that's me. That's me with Gray. He's like, cuddles. Cuddles now. So the light ceases altogether to get through the leaves in the canopy in Mirkwood. There were black squirrels in the wood. As Bilbo's sharp, inquisitive eyes got used to seeing things, he could catch glimpses of them whisking off the path and scuttling behind tree trunks. There were queer noises, too. Grunts, scufflings, and hurryings in the undergrowth, and among the leaves that lay piled endlessly thick in places on the forest floor. But what made the noises he could not see. The nastiest things they saw were the cobwebs. Dark, dense cobwebs with threads extraordinarily thick, often stretched from tree to tree, or tangled in the lower branches on either side of them. There were none stretched across the path, but whether because some magic kept it clear, or for what other reason they could not guess. It was not long before they grew to hate the forest as heartily as they had hated the tunnels of the goblins, and it seemed to offer even less hope of any ending. But they had to go on and on, long after they were sick for a sight of the sun and of the sky, and longed for the feel of wind on their faces. There was no movement of air down under the forest roof, and it was everlastingly still and dark and stuffy. Even the dwarves felt it, who were used to tunneling, and lived at times for long whiles without the light of the sun. But the hobbit, who liked holes to make a house in, but not to spend summer days in, felt that he was being slowly suffocated. The nights were the worst. It then became pitch dark. Not what you call pitch dark, but really pitch. So black that you really could see nothing. Bilbo tried flapping his hand in front of his nose, but he could not see it at all. Well, perhaps it is not true to say that they could see nothing. They could see eyes. They slept all closely huddled together, and took it in turns to watch, and when it was Bilbo's turn, he would see gleams in the darkness round them, and sometimes pairs of yellow or red or green eyes would stare at him from a little distance, and then slowly fade and disappear, and slowly shine out again in another place. And sometimes they would gleam down from the branches just above him, and that was most terrifying. But the eyes that he liked the least were horrible, pale, bulbous sort of eyes. Insect eyes, he thought. Not animal eyes, only they are much too big. Although it was not yet very cold, they tried lighting watchfires at night, but they soon gave that up. It seemed to bring hundreds and hundreds of eyes all around them, though the creatures, whatever they were careful never to let their bodies show in the little flicker of the flames. Worse still, it brought thousands of dark gray and black moths, some nearly as big as your hand, flapping and whirring round their ears. They could not stand that, nor the huge bats, black as a top hat either. So they gave up fires and sat at night and dozed in the enormous, uncanny darkness. All this went on for what seemed to the hobbit ages upon ages, and he was always hungry, for they were extremely careful with their provisions. Even so, as days followed days, and still the forest seemed just the same, they began to get anxious. The food would not last forever. It was, in fact, already beginning to get low. They tried shooting at the squirrels, and they wasted many arrows before they managed to bring one down on the path. But when they roasted it, it proved horrible to taste, and they shot no more squirrels. We did Goblin Town, now it's into Spider Town, precisely. No more squirrels. Ew. Disgusting. I've never tasted squirrel. But seeing as most game tastes like what it eats, anything that it would eat in the darkness of Mirkwood probably would be pretty nasty, so I think that would spoil any of the game. Any remaining creatures in the dark probably taste terrible. Thranduil's like, yeah, tell me about it. This is what we have to live off of. Alright, so they shot no more squirrels. They were thirsty, too, for they had none too much water, and in all the time they had seen neither spring nor stream. This was their state when one day they found their path blocked by a running water. It flowed fast and strong, but not very wide, right across the way, and it was black, or it looked in the gloom. Now my cat's meowing at me. It was well that Beorn had warned them against it, or they would have drunk from it, whatever its color, and filled some of their empty skins at its bank. As it was, they only thought of how to cross it without wetting themselves in its water. There had been a bridge of wood across, but it had rotted and fallen, leaving only the broken posts near the bank. Bilbo, kneeling on the brink Bilbo, kneeling on the brink and peering forward, cried, "There is a boat against the far bank! Now why couldn't it have been on this side?" "How far away do you think it is?" asked Thorin, for by now they knew Bilbo had the sharpest eyes among them. "Not at all far. I shouldn't think about 12 yards. 12 yards? I should have thought it was 30 at least, but my eyes don't see as well as they used 100 years ago. Still, 12 yards is as good as a mile. We can't jump it. We daren't try to wade or swim. Can any of you throw a rope?" "What's the good of that? The boat is sure to be tied up, even if we could hook it, which I doubt." "Well, I don't believe it is tied," said Bilbo. "Though, of course, I can't be sure in this light. But it looks to me as if it was just drawn up on the bank, which is low just there where the path goes down into the river." "Dory is strongest, but Fili is the youngest and still has the best sight," said Thorin. "Come here, Fili, and see if you can see the boat Mr. Baggins is talking about." My cats are being so rude. Fili thought he could, so when he had stared for a long while to get an idea of the direction, the others brought him a rope. They had several with them, and on the end of the longest they fastened one of the large iron hooks that they had used for catching their packs to the straps of their shoulders. Fili took this in hand, balanced it for a moment, and then flung it across the stream. Splash! It fell in the water. "Not far enough," said Bilbo, who was peering forward. "A couple of feet and you would have dropped it into the boat. Try again. I don't suppose the magic is strong enough to hurt you, if you just touch a bit of wet rope." Fili picked up the hook when he had drawn it back, rather doubtfully all the same. This time he threw it with a great strength. "Steady," said Bilbo. "You have thrown it right into the wood, on the other side now. Draw it back gently." Fili hauled the rope back slowly, and after a while Bilbo said, "Carefully! It's lying on the boat. Let's hope the hook will catch." It did. The rope went taut, and Fili pulled in vain. Kili came to his help, and then Owen and Glowing. They tugged, and suddenly they all fell over on their backs. Bilbo was on the lookout, however, caught the rope, and with a piece of stick fended off the little black boat as it came rushing across the stream. "Help!" he shouted, and Balin was just in time to seize the boat before it floated off down the current. "It was tied after all," he said, looking at the snapped painter that was still dangling from it. "That was a good pull, my lads, and a good job that our rope was the stronger." "Who'll cross first?" asked Bilbo. "I shall," said Thorin, "and you will come with me, and Fili and Balin. That's as many as the boat will hold at a time. After that, Kili and Owen and Glowing and Dory. Next, Ori and Nori, Beaver and Bofer, and last, Dwalin and Bombur." "I'm always last and I don't like it," said Bombur. "It's somebody else's turn today." "You should not be so fat. As you are, you must be with the last and lightest boatload." "Rude." "Don't start grumbling against orders or something bad will happen to you." "Rude, Thorin." "There aren't any oars. How are you going to push the boat back to the far bank?" asked the hobbit. "Give me another length of rope and another hook," said Fili, and when they had got it ready, he cast it into the darkness ahead, and as high as he could throw it. Since it did not fall down again, they saw that it must have stuck in the branches. "Get in now," said Fili. "And one of you haul on the rope that is stuck in the tree on the other side. One of the others must keep hold of the hook that we used at first, and when they are safe on the other side, we can hook it on and you can draw the boat back." So they're keeping one hook on the boat, and the rope will be still on the original side of the river with the remaining dwarves. So they do have a way of pulling it one direction and then pulling it the other direction. I think that's a little confusing. The real gold the dwarves got from the adventure were the friends they made along the way, yeah. Yeah, the friends that fat shame. Kind of a jerk, Thorin. Okay. So then they can draw the boat back. In this way, they were all soon on the far bank, safe across the enchanted stream. Dwalin had just scrambled out with the coiled rope on his arm, and Bombur, still grumbling, was getting ready to follow, when something bad did happen. There was a flying sound of hooves on the path ahead. Out of the gloom came suddenly the shape of a flying deer. It charged into the dwarves and bowled them over, then gathered itself for a leap. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty jump, but it did not reach the other side in safety. Thorin was the only one who had kept his feet and his wits. As soon as they had landed, he had bent his bow and fitted an arrow in case any hidden guardian of the boat appeared. Now he sent a swift and sure shot into the leaping beast. As it reached the further bank, it stumbled. The shadows swallowed it up, but they heard the sound of hooves quickly falter and then go still. Before they could shout in praise of the shot, however, a dreadful wail from Bilbo put all thoughts of venison out of their minds. "Bombur has fallen in! Bombur is drowning!" he cried. It was only too true. Bombur had only 1 foot on the land when the heart bore down on him and sprang over him. He had stumbled, thrusting the boat away from the bank, and then toppled back. Gray, my goodness, are you okay? Do you have zoomies? What's going on? Sorry, guys. Thump. He tried to just climb up my stacked dresser and failed. You need to relax. Relax, don't do it. Okay, he's lying down now. Cats are weird. Where was I? My goodness. Okay, so Bombur has fallen in, Bombur is drowning. It was only too true. Bombur had only 1 foot on the land when the heart bore down on him and sprang over him. He had stumbled, thrusting the boat away from the bank, and then toppled back into the dark water, his hands slipping off the slimy roots at the edge, while the boat span slowly off and disappeared. They could still see his hood above the water when they ran to the bank. Quickly, they flung a rope with a hook towards him. His hand caught it, and they pulled him to the shore. He was drenched from hair to boots, of course, but that was not the worst. When they laid him on the bank, he was already fast asleep, with one hand clutching the rope so tight that they could not get it from his grasp. And fast asleep he remained in spite of all they could do. Enchanted river, making people fall asleep. Makes them easy prey. I would think there would be a ton of predators near this stream, right? A ton of predators. Because they'd be like, yeah, we're just gonna wait for something to be stupid enough to fall in the water and we'll just eat it. Okay. They were still standing over him, cursing their ill luck and Bombur's clumsiness, and lamenting the loss of the boat, which made it impossible for them to go back and look for the heart, when they became aware of the dim blowing of horns in the wood, and the sound as of dogs baying far off. Then they all fell silent, and as they sat, it seemed they could hear the noise of a great hunt going by to the north of the path, though they saw no sign of it. There they sat for a long while and did not dare to make a move. Bombur slept. Bombur slept on with a little smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed them. Suddenly on the path ahead appeared some white deer, a hind and fawns as snowy white as the heart had been dark. They glimmered in the shadows. Before Thorin could cry out, 3 of the dwarves had leapt to their feet and loosed off arrows from their bows. None seemed to find their mark. The deer turned and vanished in the trees, as silently as they had come, and in vain the dwarves shot their arrows after them. "Stop! Stop!" shouted Thorin, but it was too late. The excited dwarves had wasted their last arrows, and now the bows that Beorn had given them were useless. They were a gloomy party that night, and the gloom gathered still deeper on them in the following days. They had crossed the enchanted stream, but beyond it the path seemed to straggle on just as before, and in the forest they could see no change. Yet if they had known more about it, and considered the meaning of the hunt, and the white deer that had appeared on their path, they would have known that they were at last drawing towards the eastern edge, and would soon have come, if they could have kept up their courage and their hope, to thinner trees and places where the sunlight came again. But they did not know this, and they were burdened with the heavy body of Bombur, which they had to carry along with them as best they could, taking the wearisome task in turns of 4. In turns of 4 each, while the others shared their packs. If these had not become all too light with the last few days, they would never have managed it. But a slumbering and smiling Bombur was a poor exchange for packs filled with food, however heavy. In a few days a time... Sorry, my brain just short-circuited there. In a few days, a time came when there was practically nothing left to eat or to drink. Nothing wholesome could they see growing in the wood, only funguses and herbs with pale leaves and unpleasant smell. About 4 days from the enchanted stream, they came to a part where most of the trees were beeches. They were at first inclined to be cheered by the change, for there was no undergrowth and the shadow was not so deep. There was a greenish light about them, and in places they could see some distance to either side of the path, yet the light only showed them endless lines of straight gray trunks, like the pillars of some huge twilight hall. I love that description, given how the Elven King's dwelling is modeled after Menegroth. Menegroth, to anyone who's unfamiliar, Menegroth is the main dwelling of Doriath in the First Age. Doriath was the big Sindar dwelling in Beleriand. So, the ancestors of King Thranduil actually lived in Doriath. Thranduil himself was born in Doriath. We don't know when exactly, but obviously before the realm fell at the end of the First Age. So Thranduil would have had a vague memory, perhaps, or maybe a more vivid one if he was older, depending on when he was born. He would have remembered the way that the halls of Menegroth looked, because they were hewn from stone, but they made all of the columns look like trees, so it looked like an underground forest with all these beautiful gray trunks. So I love that description here because it calls back to Doriath, and this was written so long before Doriath that I think it was just one of those little connections that he made after the fact. But I love it. Okay, let's see, where was I here? Yeah, like a huge twilight hall. There was a breath of air and a noise of wind, but it had a sad sound. A few leaves came rustling down to remind them that outside autumn was coming on. Their feet ruffled among the dead leaves of countless other autumns that drifted over the banks of the path from the deep red carpets of the forest. Still Bombur slept, and they grew very weary. At times they heard disquieting laughter. Sometimes there was singing in the distance, too. The laughter was the laughter of fair voices, not of goblins, and the singing was beautiful. But it sounded eerie and strange, and they were not comforted. Rather, they hurried on from those parts with what strength they had left. 2 days later, they found their path going downwards, and long and before long they were in a valley filled almost entirely with mighty growth of oaks. "Is there no end to this accursed forest?" said Thorin. "Somebody must climb a tree and see if they can get his head above the roof and have a look around. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path." Of course, somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him, because to be of any use, the climber must get his head above the topmost leaves, and so he must be light enough for the lightest and slenderest branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had much practice in climbing trees, but they hoisted him up onto the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right out into the path, and up he had to go as best he could. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs, and many a slap in the eye. He was greened and grimed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time. And at last, after a dreadful struggle in a difficult place where there seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near the top. All the time he was wondering whether there were spiders in the tree, and how he was going to get down again, except by falling. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of leaves, and then he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones, of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting up at him from far below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brilliantly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all round him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by the breeze, and there were everywhere hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the top of oak trees. But these were not purple at all. They were a dark, dark, velvety black without any markings to be seen. It's such a pretty visual, this deep green forest canopy and just a ton of pure black butterflies. So pretty. He looked at the black emperors for a long time, and enjoyed the feel of the breeze on his hair and on his face, but at length the cries of the dwarves, who were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. The gaze as much as he might, he could see no end to the trees and the leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind, sank back into his toes. There was no food to go back down below. Actually, as I have told you, they were not far off the edge of the forest, and if Bilbo had the sense to see it, the tree that he had climbed, though it was tall in itself, was standing near the bottom of a wide valley, so that from its top the trees seemed to swell up all round like the edges of a great bowl, and he could not expect to see how far the forest lasted. Still he did not see this, and he climbed down full of despair. He got to the bottom again at last, scratched, hot, and miserable, and he could not see anything in the gloom below when he got there. His report soon made the others as miserable as he was. "The forest goes on for ever and ever and ever in all directions. Whatever shall we do?" "And what is the use of sending a hobbit?" they cried, as if it was his fault. They did not care twopence about the butterflies, and were only made more angry when he told them of the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel. I don't know what's the use of sending a hobbit. It's like, I did what you told me to. It's not my fault there's nothing to see. Poor Bilbo. Ever put upon. Oh my gosh, my eyes are itchy again. Honestly, it's probably not even allergies from outside. It's probably allergies to my cat. I bet you I'm allergic. Because I cuddle him and then I get itchy. I'll deal with the itches. I'm never giving up my cats. Not ever.
Love you, Gray.
He's at the food bowl now. Alright, let's continue. Here we go. That night they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food. The next morning when they woke, the first thing they noticed was that they were still gnawingly hungry. And the next thing was that it was raining, and that here and there the drip of it was dropping heavily on the forest floor. That only reminded them that they were also parchingly thirsty, without doing anything to relieve them. You cannot quench a terrible thirst by standing under giant oaks and waiting for a chance drip to fall in your tongue. The only scrap of comfort there was came unexpectedly from Bombur. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. He could not make out where he was at all, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house, and they had great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all the many adventures they'd had since. When he heard that there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly in the legs. "Why ever did I wake up?" he cried. "I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches and fires burning on the ground. And there was a great feast going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was a merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink." "You need not try," said Thorin. "In fact, if you can't talk about something else, you'd better be silent. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to your idiotic dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry even after weeks of short commons." Again, Thorin, rude. He's not a very likable character, is he? There was nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts round their empty stomachs and hoist their empty sacks and packs, and trudge along the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. So dramatic. This they did all that day, going very slowly and wearily, while Bombur kept on wailing that his legs would not carry him and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. "No, you don't," they said. "Let your legs take their share. We have carried you far enough." All the same, he suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself on the ground. "Go on if you must," he said. "I'm just going to lie here and sleep and dream of food, if I can't get it any other way. I hope I never wake up again." At that very moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, "What was that? I thought I saw a twinkle of light in the forest." They all looked, and a longish way off it seemed they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another, and another sprang out beside it. Even Bombur got up, and they hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them, and to the left of the path, and when at last they had drawn level with it, it seemed plain that torches and fires were burning under the trees, but a good way off their track. "It looks as if my dreams are coming true," gasped Bombur, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the wood after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizard out of Beorn. "A feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it," said Thorin. "But without a feast we shan't remain alive much longer anyway," said Bombur, and Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. But then they could not agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of warnings, hunger decided them, because Bombur kept on describing all the good things that were being eaten, according to his dream, in the woodland feast. So they all left the path and plunged into the forest together.
Ooh, bad choice. Bad choice. You shall rue the day.
After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered round the trunks and looked into the clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground leveled. There were many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown, and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees around them. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of the roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not even find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After blundering frantically in the gloom, falling over logs, bumping, crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles, at last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. By that time they had, of course, quite forgotten in what direction the path lay, and they were all hopelessly lost, at least till morning. There was nothing for it but to settle down for the night, right where they were. They did not even dare to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again. But they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only just getting drowsy when Dori, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming out again over there, and there are more than ever of them." Up they all jumped. There, sure enough, not far away, were scores of twinkling lights, and they heard the voices and the laughter quite plainly. They crept towards them. They crept slowly towards them, in a single line, each touching the back of the one in front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one is to stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." "What about me of them?" thought Bilbo. "And anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him." When they got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forward into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. Out went all the lights again, and complete darkness fell. If it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time, and they simply could not find the Hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it only made 13, and they shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins! Hobbit, you dratted Hobbit! Hi, Hobbit! Confiscate you! Where are you?" and other things of that sort, but there was no answer. They were just giving up hope when Dori stumbled across him by sheer luck. In the dark, he fell over what he thought was a log, and he found it was a hobbit curled up fast asleep. It took a great deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake he was not pleased at all. "I was having such a lovely dream," he grumbled, "all about having a most gorgeous dinner." "Good heavens! He was gone like Bombur," they said. "Don't tell us about dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them." "They are the best I am likely to get in this beastly place," he muttered, as he lay down beside the dwarves and tried to go back to sleep to find his dream again. But that was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Kili, who was watching then, came and roused them all again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of light begun not far away. Hundreds of torches and many fires must have been lit suddenly and by magic. And hark to the singing of the harps." Yeah, like, listen, there are harps now. After lying and listening for a while, they found they could not resist the desire to go nearer and try once more to get help. Up they got again, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much as Bombur had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping, and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted in their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin into their midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of a word. Out went all light. The fires leaped up in black smokes. Ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was filled again with their clamor and their cries. Elves are like... The wood elves are pretty xenophobic. No outsiders. No dwarves allowed. Okay, their clamors and their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling, "Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin! Fili, Kili, Bombur, Beaver, Bofer, Dwalin, Balin, Thorin, Oakenshield," while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all around him, with an occasional Bilbo thrown in. But the cries of the others got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away. And he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of his most miserable moments. But he soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything till day came with some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about, tiring himself out, with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself down with his back to a tree, and not for the first time fell to thinking of his far-distant hobbit hole, with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter, when he felt something touch him. Something like a strong, sticky string was against his left hand, and when he tried to move, he found that his legs were already wrapped in the same stuff, so that when he got up, he fell over. Then a great spider, who'd been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abdominal threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him to keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and struck it with his sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leapt and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks, until he killed it with another stroke. And then he fell down and remembered nothing more for a long while. Poor Spidey. He was just trying to eat. But see, this is what happens. This is what happens when spiders crawl where you sleep. Stabbity. See, Bilbo and me, we understand. We understand the rules. There was the usual dim gray light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow, the killing of the giant spider all alone by himself in the dark, without the help of the wizard or the dwarves or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, and much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach, as he wiped his sword on the grass and put it back in its sheath. "I will give you a name," he said to it, "and I shall call you Sting." After that he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off, unless they had been made prisoners by the elves or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while wondering in what direction the path lay, and in what direction he should go first to look for the dwarves. Yeah, I would definitely stab that spider. Absolutely. 100% on Bilbo's side here. Hey, thank you for the hearts. Oh, yeah. I mentioned earlier that there are two rules for me and spiders, because spiders are good, they serve a purpose, but two rules. One, you do not crawl where I'm sleeping. And two, no dangling. No dangling. Those are insta-deaths. I will kill those spiders. And this spider just did that to Bilbo, so I don't blame him at all. Oh, thank you so much. Feel free to jump over to my YouTube channel as well. That's where I need the Minutes Watch. So if you'd really like to support me and you want to continue reading The Hobbit with me, please head over to my YouTube channel. Love you guys. Alright, so Bilbo's now looking for the dwarves. "Oh, why did we not remember Beorn's advice and Gandalf's?" he lamented. "What a mess we are now in. We. I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone." In the end, he made as good a guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help had come in the night. And by luck, he was born with a good share of it, he guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever at quietness, especially in woods, as I have already told you. Also, Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. He had picked his way stealthily for some distance when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for that forest, like a patch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made by spiderwebs, one behind and over and tangled with another. Suddenly he saw, too, that there were spiders huge and horrible sitting in the branches above him, and ring or no ring, he trembled with fear lest they should discover him. Standing behind a tree, he watched a group of them for some time, and then in the silence and stillness of the wood he realized that these loathsome creatures were speaking to one another. Speaking spiders. Nasty creatures. Whew. Their voices were a sort of thin creaking and hissing, but he could make out many of the words that they said. How does that work? Tolkien, explain yourself. Freaking spiders with this hissing language that somehow a hobbit just happens to understand? What? Maybe it's the power of the ring. Maybe the ring is like a decoder ring. It's a decoder ring. It's canon. It's headcanon now. Oh, thank you so much for the wishing bottles. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Annie. Those are super cute, too. I like those bottles. Like, I want bottles. I used to have an obsession with bottles. I would collect a bunch of bottles. I think I got that from my sister. They used to collect a bunch of bottles, too. Hissing language. How on earth does Bilbo understand this language? Whatever. He could make out many of the words that they said. They were talking about the dwarves. It was a sharp struggle, but worth it, said one. What nasty thick skins they have, to be sure. But I'll wager there's a good juice inside. Aye, they make fine eating when they've hung a bit, said another. Don't hang them too long, said a third. They're not as fat as they might be. Been feeding none too well of late, I should guess. Kill them, I say, hissed a fourth. Kill them now and hang them dead for a while. They're dead now, I'll warrant, said the first. That they are not. I saw one a-struggling just now. Just coming round again, I should say, after a beautiful sleep. I'll show you. Hissy, soft-spoken spiders. Yuck. With that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till it came to a dozen bundles hanging in a row from a high branch. Bilbo was horrified, now that he noticed them for the first time dangling in the shadows, to see a dwarvish foot sticking out of the bottoms of some of the bundles, or here or there the tip of a nose, or a bit of beard, or of hood. To the fattest of these bundles the spider went. It is poor old Bumber, I'd bet, thought Bilbo, and nipped hard at the nose that stuck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight and hard. There was life in Bomber still. There was a noise like the kicking of a flabby football. And the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching itself with its own thread just in time. The others laughed. I think they would cackle. But the others laughed. You were quite right, they said. The meat's alive and kicking. I'll soon put an end to that, hissed the angry spider, climbing back onto the branch. Yeah. Spiders. No. It's a whole lot of nope. Just all nope. Nope all day long. Oh, thanks for switching, Annie. I appreciate you. Okay, here we go. Bilbo saw that the moment had come when he must do something. He could not get up at the brutes, and he had nothing to shoot with. But looking about, he saw that in this place were many stones lying in what appeared to be now dry little watercourse. Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with a stone, and it did not take him long to find a nice smooth egg-shaped one that fitted his hand cozily. As a boy, he used to practice throwing stones at things, until rabbits and squirrels and even birds got out of his way as quick as lightning if they saw him stoop. And even grown up, he had still spent a deal of his time at quoits? I'm not familiar with the word. Dart throwing, shooting at the wand, bowls, nine pins, and other quiet games of the aiming and throwing sort. Indeed, he could do lots of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking, that I haven't had time to tell you about. There's no time now. While he was picking up stones, the spider had reached Bombur, and soon he would have been dead. At that moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider plunk on the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree, flop, to the ground, with all its legs curled up. Yeah, you get those spiders, Bilbo. The next stone went whizzing through the spider web, snapping its cords, and taking off the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead. After that, there was a deal of commotion in the spider in the spider colony, and they forgot the dwarves for a bit, I can tell you. They could not see Bilbo, but they could make a good guess at the direction from which the stones were coming. As quick as lightning, they came running and swinging towards the hobbit. No! Oh, God. Flinging out their long threads in all directions till the air seemed full of waving snares. Bilbo, however, soon slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him to lead the furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves if he could, to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When about 50 had gone off to the place where he had stood before, he threw some more stones at these, and at others that had stopped behind. Then, dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them, and bring them all after him, and also to let the dwarves hear his voice. This is what he sang. Okay. Old fat spider spinning in a tree. Old fat spider can't see me. Attercop, Attercop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look at me. Kill me. Old Tom Noddy, all big body. Old Tom Noddy can't spy me. Attercop, Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. You'll never catch me up your tree. Good job, Bilbo. Not very good, perhaps. But then you must remember that he had to make it up himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. It did what he wanted anyway. As he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped. Practically all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground, others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree. How? Spiders dangle. They don't swing very much. I'm just picturing a spider doing Tarzan. Like, or because they hiss, rather. Yeah, it sounds like kissing in a tree song. Exactly. That is precisely what I was thinking. Oh, that spider sitting in a tree. K-I-S... Oh, sorry. Okay, so some are going along the branches, some dropped to the ground, some swung from tree to tree or cast new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he had expected. They were frightfully angry. Quite apart from the stones, no spider has ever liked being called Attercop. And Tom Noddy, of course, is insulting to anyone. What? If someone calls me Tom Noddy, I'm gonna be like, who? What? I'm not gonna be super offended because I'll be like, okay. I'd have to do a Google search and see if these were actually used as insults or if it's just something silly that Tolkien put in here. Silly is sort of the vibe that he went for in The Hobbit. Off Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had run now to different points in the glade where they lived, and were busy spinning webs across all the spaces between the tree stems. Very soon the hobbit would be caught in a thick fence of them all round him. That, at least, was the spider's idea. Standing now in the middle of the hunting and spinning insects, Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. Why, Tolkien? Sorry, but I have zero confidence in me reciting the song. Lazy lob and crazy cob are weaving webs to wind me. I am far more sweet than other meat, but still they cannot find me. Good rhythm on this one. Here am I, naughty little fly, you are fat and lazy. You cannot trap me though you try, in your cobwebs crazy. With that, he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed up with a web, but luckily not a proper web, only great strands of double-thick spider rope, run hastily backwards and forwards from trunk to trunk. Out came his little sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was, and at once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the hobbit along the ground and the branches, hairy legs waving, nippers and spinners snapping, eyes popping full of froth and rage. They followed him into the forest until Bilbo had gone as far as he dared. Then, quieter than a mouse, he stole back. He had precious little time, he knew, before the spiders were disgusted and came back to their trees where the dwarves were hung. In the meantime, he had to rescue them. The worst part of the job was getting up onto the long branch where the bundles were dangling. I don't suppose he would have managed it if a spider had not luckily left a rope hanging down. With its help, though it stuck to his hand and hurt him, he scrambled up, only to meet an old, slow, wicked, fat-bodied spider, who had remained behind to guard the prisoners, and had been busy pinching them to see which was the juiciest to eat. You know, like you do. Just testing the meat a little bit. It's fine. Which were the juiciest to eat. It had thought of starting the feast while the others were away, but Mr. Baggins was in a hurry, and before the spider knew what was happening, it felt his sting and rolled off the branch, dead. Bilbo's next job was to loose a dwarf. What was he to do? If he cut the string which hung him, the wretched dwarf would tumble thump to the ground a good way below. Wriggling along the branch, which made all the poor dwarves dance and dangle like ripe fruit, he reached the first bundle. Killy or Filly, he thought, by the tip of the blue hood sticking out of the top. Most likely Filly. He thought by the tip of a long nose poking out of the winding threads. He managed by leaning over to cut most of the strong sticky threads that bound him round. Then, sure enough, with a kick and a struggle most of Filly emerged. I'm afraid Bilbo actually laughed at the sight of him jerking his stiff arms and legs as he danced on the spider string under his armpits, just like one of those funny toys bobbing on a wire. Somehow or other, Filly was got on to the branch, and then he did his best to help the hobbit, although he was feeling very sick and ill from spider poison, and from hanging most of the night, and the next day wound round and round with only his nose to breathe through. It took him ages to get the beastly stuff out of his eyes and eyebrows, and as for his beard, he had to cut most of it off. Well, between them, they started to haul up first one dwarf and then another and slash them free. None of them were better off than Filly, and some of them were worse. Some had hardly been able to breathe at all. Long noses are sometimes useful, you see. And some had been more poisoned. In this way they rescued Killy, Beaver, Bofer, Dori, and Nori. Poor old Bombur was so exhausted, he was the fattest, and had been constantly pinched and poked.
I don't like the way this book deals with fat people.
Rude. Though, I mean, in this case it is reasonable. Spiders would be poking the thickest one, being like, yeah, this one. This one's the best. Dibs. Okay. Poor old Bombur was so exhausted, he was the fattest, and had been constantly pinched and poked, that he just rolled off the branch and fell plop onto the ground, fortunately onto leaves, and lay there. But there were still 5 dwarves hanging at the full of the branch when the spiders began to come back, more full of rage than ever. Eru dang it. Eru dang it. By the fires of Autumno. I could curse in Elvish. I'd have to look them up, though. It's been a while since I used them. I just made a video about them and then completely forgot them. Except for Leithiad Fuil. Leithiad Fuil I've done enough times that it's in my brain, and that's basically piece of shit. Leithiad Fuil! Okay, so spiders are full of rage. What's gonna happen? Bilbo immediately went to the other end of the branch nearest the tree trunk and kept back those that crawled up. He had taken off his ring when he rescued Philly and forgotten to put it on again, so now they all began to splutter and hiss. "Now we see you, you nasty little creature! We will eat you and leave your bones and skin hanging on a tree. Ah, he's got a sting, has he? Well, we'll get him all the same, and then we'll hang him head downwards for a day or two." I feel like I'm morphing into one of the pirates from Pirates of the Caribbean. They're more guidelines, really, than actual rules. While this was going on, the other dwarves were working at the rest of the captives and cutting at the threads with their knives. Soon all would be free, though it was not clear what would happen after that. Spiders had caught them pretty easily the night before, but that had been unawares and in the dark. This time there looked like being a horrible battle. Suddenly Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders had gathered round old Bombur on the floor and had tied him up again. Poor guy. And were dragging him away. He gave a shout and slashed at the spiders in front of him. They quickly gave way, and he scrambled and fell down the tree right into the middle of those on the ground. His little sword was something new in the way of stings for them. How it darted to and fro! It shone with delight as he stabbed at them. Half a dozen were killed before the rest drew off and left Bombur to Bilbo. Come down! Come down!" he shouted to the dwarves on the branch. "Don't stay up there and be netted!" For he saw spiders swarming up all the neighboring trees and crawling along the boughs above the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarves scrambled or jumped or dropped, 11 all in a heap, most of them very shaky and little use on their legs. There they were at last, 12 of them, counting poor old Bombur, who was being propped up on either side by his cousin Beaver and his brother Bofer. And Bilbo was dancing about and waving his sting, and hundreds of angry spiders were goggling at them all round and round and above. It looked pretty hopeless. Then the battle began. Some of the dwarves had knives, and some had sticks, and all of them could get at stones, and Bilbo had his elvish dagger. Again and again the spiders were beaten off, and many of them were killed. But it could not go on for long. Bilbo was nearly tired out. Only 4 of the dwarves were able to stand firmly, and soon they would all be overpowered like weary flies. Already the spiders were beginning to weave their webs all around them again from tree to tree. In the end, Bilbo could think of no plan except to let the dwarves into the secret of his ring. He was rather sorry about it, but it could not be helped. "I'm going to disappear," he said. "I shall draw the spiders off if I can, and you must keep together and make in the opposite direction, to the left there. That is more or less the way towards the place where we last saw the elf fires." It was difficult to get them to understand, what with their dizzy heads and the shouts and the whacking of sticks and the throwing of stones. But at last Bilbo felt he could delay no longer. The spiders were drawing their circle ever closer. He suddenly slipped on his ring, and to the great astonishment of the dwarves, he vanished. Soon there came the sound of Lazy Lob and Atterkop from among the trees away on the right. That upset the spiders greatly. They stopped advancing, and some went off in the direction of the voice. Attercop made them so angry that they lost their wits. Then Balin, who had grasped Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led an attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot, and sending a shower of stones, they drove at the spiders on the left and burst through the ring. Away behind them now, the shouting and singing suddenly stopped. Hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught, the dwarves went on. Not fast enough, though. They were sick and weary, and they could not go much better than at a hobble and a wobble, though many of the spiders were close behind. Every now and then they had to turn and fight the creatures that were overtaking them, and already some spiders were in the trees above them and throwing down their long, clinging threads. Things were looking pretty bad again, when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. Go on, he shouted. "I will do the stinging." And he did. He darted backwards and forwards, slashing at spider threads, hacking at their legs, and stabbing at their fat bodies if they came too near. The spiders swelled with rage, and spluttered and frothed, and hissed out horrible curses, but they had become mortally afraid of Sting, and dared not come very near, now that it had come back. So curse as they would, their prey moved slowly but steadily away. It was a most terrible business, and seemed to take hours. But at last, just when Bilbo felt he could not lift his hand for a single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave up, and followed them no more, but went back disappointed to their dark colony. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of a ring where elf fires had been. Whether it was one that they had seen the night before they could not tell, but it seemed that some good magic lingered in such spots, which the spiders did not like. At any rate, here the light was greener, and the boughs less thick and threatening, and they had a chance to rest and draw breath. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have the whole vanishing business carefully explained, and the finding of the ring interested them so much that for a while they forgot their own troubles. Balin, in particular, insisted on having the Gollum story, riddles and all, told all over again, with the ring in its proper place. But after a time, the light began to fail, and then other questions were asked. Where were they? And where was their path? And where was there any food? And what were they going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect to get the answers. From which you can see that they had changed their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much, and had begun to have great respect for him, as Gandalf had said they would. Indeed, they really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them, and were not merely grumbling. They knew only too well that they would soon all have been dead if it had not been for the Hobbit, and they thanked him many times. Some of them even got up and bowed right to the ground before him, though they fell over with the effort, and could not get on their legs again for some time. Poor dwarves. Poison is no joke. Yeah, we're lucky those weren't widow spiders. One sting from them, you done. An oversized widow would be freaking frightening. Actually, small aside here, when I made my own fantasy world with my partner, we had a place that we called Spinner's Forest. And I even made a map of Spinner's Forest. It wasn't a very good one, it was a very rough map, but there are different... Think of it like a bullseye. So there are different circles, right? Each circle was home to a different kind of spider. And so we had jumping spiders and spitting spiders, which are crazy fascinating. I had to do a bunch of research on spiders, which kind of desensitized me a tad for a short while, and that was nice. But there were jumping spiders and spitting spiders. The next one was the wolf and trapdoor spiders. And then the inner circle was the widows. And the leader of the entire group was the queen widow. And you had, spider broods, and, they were raising their families, right? Kind of. If they weren't eating them, because that's what spiders do. But one of the younger widow spiders, her name is Ardea, and Ardea ends up becoming friends with one of the elves. They speak telepathically. It's fine. Because in our world, the spiders are fascinated by music because they can't make it. They can't make music for themselves. So, bard elves are particularly beloved by them. They'll eat everybody else, but the bards will survive. So, I made one of the younger female widows a friend of one of the elves. It was fun. But Spinner's Forest, yeah. The leader in our forest was a black widow. So, fun aside there of my own fictional world. One of these days I'll finally get everything down and organized in a way that hopefully I can make a tabletop RPG. I would love to do that, because there's a whole lot of world building in my fantasy world in my brain. And it would be really fun to flesh that out and make it into something everyone can enjoy. I think Sandra would appreciate that. That would do Sandra proud, because we never published any of our fiction that we had written for this fantasy world that we'd made. We had planned a bunch of it, but we hadn't written it in a format that could be published, so that sucks. Okay, where were we here? Okay. Alright, okay, so some of the dwarves were bowing to him, and it made them fall over, and it took them a while to get back on their feet again. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw that he had some wits, as well as luck and a magic ring. And all three were very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel there really was something of a bold adventurer about himself after all, though he would have felt a lot bolder still if there had been anything to eat. But there was nothing at all, and none of them were fit to go and look for anything, or to search for the lost path. The lost path! No other idea would come into Bilbo's tired head. He just sat staring in front of him at the endless trees, and after a while they all fell silent again. All except Balin. Long after the others had stopped talking and shut their eyes, he kept on muttering and chuckling to himself. Gollum! Well, I'm blessed. So that's how he sneaked past me, is it? Now I know. Just crept quietly along, did you, Mr. Baggins? Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo. Bilbo. Bo. And then he fell asleep, and there was complete silence for a long while. All of a sudden, Dwalin opened an eye and looked around at them. Where is Thorin? He asked. It was a terrible shock. Of course there were only 13 of them, 12 dwarves and a hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him, magic or dark monsters, and shuddered as they lay lost in the forest. There they dropped off one by one into uncomfortable sleep full of horrible dreams, as evening wore to black night. And there we must leave them for the present, too sick and weary to set guards or to take turns at watching. Oh my gosh. Itchy nose, pardon me. Thorin had been caught much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log into sleep as he stepped into a circle of light? The next time it had been Thorin who stepped forward, and as the lights went out he fell like a stone enchanted. All the noise of the dwarves lost in the night, their cries as the spiders caught them and bound them, and all the sounds of the battle next day had passed over him unheard. Then the wood elves had come to him, and bound him and carried him away. Ooh, here we go with the elves. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the west, and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to ferry in the west, meaning Valinor. There the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages, and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things, before some came back to the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and run over open lands by moonlight or starlight. And after the coming of men, they took ever more and more to the gloaming and the dusk. Still, elves they were, and remain, and that is a good people. So the reference there was to the sundering of the elves into different groups, and the difference between the Morquendi and the Calaquendi. Morquendi are the dark elves, just elves who were in the darkness of Middle-earth, and the Calaquendi are the elves that made it over into Valinor and saw the two trees, which were a great light source back in the day. This is ages and ages ago. So that's what he's basically explaining, and he makes reference to three different kinds of elves: the light elves, the deep elves, and the sea elves. So the light elves are the Vanyar, the deep elves are the Noldor, and the sea elves are the Teleri. So just in case you're wondering about the terms that are used in the Silmarillion and in Lord of the Rings, that's where they come from. Because remember, this book was made first. This book was made first, and eventually was altered slightly to connect it back to the other books that were made later. So that's sort of a summary of the sundering of the elves and which populations went where. So the elves that stayed behind and didn't go over the mountains into Beleriand are called the Nandor. And the Sylvan elves are descended from the Nandor. It's like one sect of the Nandor. The Sylvan elves are the elves that never went over the Misty Mountains. They didn't even go that far. They stopped at the Misty Mountains. They stayed in Ravanion, which is the region where Mirkwood is, or Greenwood, as it was called back then, and Lothlorien, and just, the forests on the east side of the Misty Mountains, which is where they currently are. So they're elves, they're just xenophobic a bit. And that is good people. In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood, on its eastern side, there lived at this time their greatest king. Before his huge doors of stone, a river ran out of the heights of the forest, and flowed on and out into the marshes at the feet of the high wooded lands. This great cave, from which countless smaller ones opened out on every side, wound far underground, and had many passages and wide halls, but it was lighter and more wholesome than any goblin dwelling, and neither so deep nor so dangerous. In fact, the subjects of the king mostly lived and hunted in the open woods, and had houses and huts on the ground and in the branches. So this is where we get the idea that elves live in trees. They really live wherever the fuck they want, but while they do have these halls underground, it's mostly a last resort. Not all of them live there. They tend to live in the trees and live on the ground in the forest. The beeches were their favorite trees. The king's cave was his palace, and the strong place of his treasure, and the fortress of his people against their enemies. Fortress, that's the word I was looking for. It was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So to the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, for they did not love dwarves and thought he was an enemy. In ancient days they had had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say the dwarves gave a different account, and said that they only took what was their due, for the Elf King had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, and had afterwards refused to give them their pay. If the Elf King had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems, and though his hoard was rich, he was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great a treasure as the other elf lords of old. His people neither mined nor worked metal or jewels, nor did they bother with trade or with tilling the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, though Thorin's family had had nothing to do with the old quarrel I have spoken of. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him, when they took their spell off him and he came to his senses. And also he was determined that no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. Before we get into the conversation he's about to have, just a couple notes about the animosity between the elves and the dwarves, specifically the wood elves and the dwarves. Again, this calls back to the First Age and Doriath, Doriath being the main dwelling of the Sindar elves in Beleriand. King Thingol was their king, very, very tall. He was one of the tallest on-record elves ever. Very, very tall guy, probably over 7 feet. Very tall. And at one point, he's the one who tasked Beren and Luthien with getting one of the Silmarils out of Morgoth's crown, which he thought, he was just like, he'll never be able to do it, it's fine, like, I'm just gonna send him and he'll die, and then Luthien can marry somebody else. That was the master plan. Unfortunately for him, Beren and Luthien managed to get a Silmaril, so he had to consent to them marrying each other. This Silmaril was then given to the dwarves to be set into a necklace, and that was called the Nauglamir. So the Nauglamir was a vast, beautiful, detailed, bejeweled necklace or neck piece that the dwarves made, and they set the Silmaril into that. And after they had done this, they were like, you know, we crafted this whole thing, so we're gonna keep it. To which Thingol was like, how about no? And also, you guys are stupid and lesser creatures. Which, of course, the dwarves did not take kindly to. Now, were the dwarves... Did the dwarves have a rightful claim to the Silmaril? Absolutely not. Did they have a rightful claim to the rest of the necklace? Absolutely they did. So this is where you get the uncomfortable tug-of-war between the elves and the dwarves here. So the Sindar elves and King Thingol insulted the dwarves, which was not a good move. Because then the dwarves, who were outraged, they left and they were like, this asshole, you know, he's not gonna pay us. And they return with swords and they kill him. Which, of course, makes the elves angry, and so the dwarves have a battle with the elves in the halls of Menegroth. So the king dies. His family is you know, whisked away to safety. But Thingol dies. The realm is sacked by the dwarves, so the dwarves steal all the treasure, which, you know, was not theirs. So they steal everything, and then the elves catch up with them when they're about to cross the river. I think it was Aglon? The River Aglon? It's near the River Gallion. The River Gallion is a north-south river. And they're about to cross the Gallion, and the elves find them and slaughter them. So there's a lot of lost treasure in that river for a while. But that's sort of the, that's the beef between specifically the dwarves and the elves of, you know, wood elf descent. So Thranduil was there during these events, and he would remember it well. the killing of his king and the sacking of Doriath. So he would definitely not take kindly to dwarves in general. And the other element there is that he hoarded riches because he was hoping he would find something of sufficient worth and sufficient magical property to help protect his people. Like, there was a motivation here that makes sense, and that's that Thranduil was not given a ring of power. His father Orifer was not given a ring of power like Galadriel, Elrond, and Gil-galad, and Círdan for a while. So these other major elf lords of the Second Age were all given rings of power, but Orifer was not. So there's also a bit of animosity between the wood elves and the other elves. This is why it says that they're so wary of strangers. You know, if they have a fault, it's that they don't trust anybody. They've been given reason not to. Theirs was the only realm that didn't have a ring of power to help protect it from Sauron. So Thranduil is bitter, and he deserves to have a bit more credit than is given in The Hobbit. Because all of this stuff isn't really explained in detail, and because dwarves are the main characters in The Hobbit, we look more favorably upon the dwarves in this text than the elves, which is fine. I'm just saying it's biased. We don't get the full story here. It makes Thranduil look like an asshole. But he's not that bad. But from Thranduil's perspective, he's being super reasonable. And from Thorin's perspective, he's being very unreasonable. So there we go. So we've got Thorin being dragged before the king. The king looked sternly on Thorin when he was brought before him and asked him many questions, but Thorin would only say that he was starving. "Why did you and your folk 3 times try to attack my people at their merrymaking?" asked the king. "We did not attack them," answered Thorin. "We came to beg because we were starving." "Where are your friends now, and what are they doing?" "I don't know, but I expect starving in the forest." "What were you doing in the forest?" "Looking for food and drink because we were starving." "But what brought you into the forest at all?" asked the king angrily. At that, Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. "Very well," said the king. "Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he waits 100 years. Elves are very patient. Then the elves put thongs on him. Har har. They put thongs on him. I'm sorry, I'm too queer. Then the elves put thongs on him. Bow, chicka, bow, bow. Sexy. Who wants to see Thorin in a thong? Just kidding. It's fine. You guys knew what you were signing up for with me. Thongs of leather. They were tying him up. I know what it actually means. I'm just being silly. The elves put thongs on him and shut him in one of the inmost caves with strong wooden doors, and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, if not very fine, for wood elves were not goblins, and were reasonably well behaved even to their worst enemies, when they captured them. The giant spiders were the only living things that they had no mercy upon. So, again, give the elves their due. They're not evil folk. They don't like the dwarves, but they'll still treat them well. They will not be starving these prisoners. There in the king's dungeon poor Thorin lay, and after he had got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs to the next chapter, and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. Thus ends chapter 8. It's a long chapter. I read that chapter so many freaking times because the elves instantly captivated me. And I was like, I want to know everything. I want to know everything about the elves. Not the thongs. I mean, but seriously. Oh man. So, let's see. This is a fairly long chapter too. It's a bit of a long stream today, I'll admit. So we're 2 hours in and we're only now starting chapter 9. I'll try and go quickly. Chapter 9, Barrels Out of Bond. The day after the battle with the spiders, Bilbo and the dwarves made one last despairing effort to find a way out before they died of hunger and thirst. They got up and staggered on in the direction which 8 out of the 13 of them guessed to be the one in which the path lay. But they never found out if they were right. Such day as there ever was in the forest was fading, once more, into the blackness of night, when suddenly out sprang the light of many torches all around them, like hundreds of red stars. Out leapt wood elves with their bows and spears, and called the dwarves to a halt. There was no thought of a fight, even if the dwarves had not been in such a state that they were actually glad to be captured. Their small knives, the only weapons they had, would have been of no use against the arrows of the elves that could hit a bird's eye in the dark. So they simply stopped dead and sat down and waited, all except Bilbo, who popped on his ring and slipped quickly to one side. That is why, when the elves bound the dwarves in a long line, one behind the other, and counted them, they never found nor counted the Hobbit. Nor did they hear or feel him trotting along behind their torchlight as they led off their prisoners into the forest. Each dwarf was blindfolded. But that did not make much difference, for even Bilbo, with the use of his eyes, could not see where they were going, and neither he nor the others knew where they had started from anyway. Excuse me. Bilbo had all he could do to keep up with the torches, for the elves were making the dwarves go as fast as ever they could, sick and weary as they were. The king had ordered them to make haste. Suddenly, the torches stopped, and the Hobbit had just time to catch up before they began to cross the bridge. This was the bridge that led across the river to the king's doors. The water flowed dark and swift and strong beneath, and at the far end were gates before the mouth of a huge cave that ran into the side of a steep slope covered with trees. There the great beeches came right down to the bank, till their feet were in the stream. Across the bridge the elves thrust their prisoners, but Bilbo hesitated in the rear. He did not at all like the look of the cavern mouth, and he only made up his mind not to desert his friends just in time to scuttle over the heels of the last elves before the great gates of the king closed behind them with a clang. Inside, the passages were lit with red torchlight, and the elf guards sang as they marched along the twisting, crossing, and echoing paths. These were not like those of goblin cities. They were smaller, less deep underground, and filled with cleaner air. In the great hall, with pillars hewn out of the living stone, sat the Elven King on a chair of carven wood. On his head was a crown of berries and red leaves, for the autumn was come again. In the spring he wore a crown of woodland flowers. In his hand he held a carven staff of oak. The prisoners were brought before him, and though he looked grimly at them, he told his men to unbind them, for they were ragged and weary. "Besides, they need no ropes in here," said he. "There is no escape from my magic doors for those who were once brought inside." Long and searchingly he questioned the dwarves about their doings, and where they were going to, and where they were coming from. But he got little more news out of them than out of Thorin. They were surly and angry, and did not even pretend to be polite. "What have we done, O king?" said Balin, who was the eldest left. "Is it a crime to be lost in the forest, and to be hungry and thirsty, to be trapped by spiders? Are the spiders your tame beasts or your pets, if killing them makes you angry?" Such a question, of course, made the king angrier than ever. And he answered, "It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you were in my kingdom, using the road my people made? Did you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have a right to know what brings you here. And if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you have learned sense and manners." Thus spake Thranduil. Then he ordered the dwarves each to be put in a separate cell and to be given food and drink, but not be allowed to pass the doors of their little prisons until one at least of them was willing to tell him all he wanted to know. But he did not tell them that Thorin was also a prisoner with him, and it was Bilbo who found that out. Shift. Alright. Poor Mr. Baggins. It was a weary long time that he lived in that place all alone, and always in hiding, never daring to take off his ring, hardly daring to sleep, even tucked away in the darkest and remotest corners he could find. For something to do he took to wandering about the Elven King's palace. Magic shut the gates, but he could sometimes get out if he was quick. Companies of the Wood Elves, sometimes with the king at their head, would from time to time ride out to hunt, or to other business in the woods and in the lands to the east. Then, if Bilbo was very nimble, he could slip out just behind them, though it was a dangerous thing to do. More than once he was nearly caught in the doors, as they clashed together when the last elf passed. He did not dare to march among them because of his shadow, altogether thin and wobbly as it was in torchlight, or for fear of being bumped into and discovered. And when he did not go out, which was not very often, he did no good. And when he did go out, which was not very often, he did no good. He did not wish to desert the dwarves, and indeed he did not know where in the world to go without them. He could not keep up with the hunting elves all the time they were out, so he never discovered the ways out of the wood, and was left to wander miserably in the forest, terrified of losing himself, until the chance came of returning. He was hungry, too, outside, for he was no hunter. But inside the caves he could pick up a living of some sort by stealing food from store or table when no one was at hand. "I am like a burglar that can't get away, but must go on miserably burgling the same house day after day," he thought. "This is the dreariest and dullest part of all this wretched, tiresome, uncomfortable adventure. I wish I was back in my hobbit hole, by my own warm fireside with a lamp shining." He often wished, too, that he could get a message for help sent to the wizard, but that, of course, was quite impossible, and he soon realized that if anything was to be done, it would have to be done by Mr. Baggins, alone and unaided. Eventually, after a week or 2 of this sneaking sort of life, by watching and following the guards and taking what chances he could, he managed to find out where each dwarf was kept. He found all their 12 cells in different parts of the palace, and after a time he got to know his way around quite well. What was his surprise one day to overhear some of the guards talking, and to learn that there was another dwarf in prison too, in a specially deep, dark place. He guessed at once, of course, that it was Thorin, and after a while he found that his guess was right. At last, after many difficulties, he managed to find the place when no one was about, and to have a word with the chief of the dwarves. Thorin was too wretched to be angry any longer at his misfortunes, and he was beginning to think of telling the king all about his treasure and his quest, which shows how low-spirited he had become, when he heard Bilbo's little voice at his keyhole. He could hardly believe his ears. Soon, however, he made up his mind that he could not be mistaken, and he came to the door and had a long whispered talk with the hobbit on the other side. So it was that Bilbo was able to take secretly Thorin's message to each of the other imprisoned dwarves, telling them that Thorin, their chief, was also in prison close at hand, and that no one was to reveal their errand to the king, not yet, nor before Thorin gave the word. For Thorin had taken heart again, hearing how the Hobbit had rescued his companions from the spiders, and was determined once more not to ransom himself with promises to the king of a share in the treasure, until all hope of escaping in any other way had disappeared. Until, in fact, the remarkable Mr. Invisible Baggins, of whom he began to have a very high opinion indeed, had altogether failed to think of something clever. The other dwarves quite agreed when they got the message. They all thought their own shares in the treasure, which they quite regarded as theirs in spite of their plight and still unconquered dragon, would suffer seriously if the Wood Elves claimed part of it. And they all trusted Bilbo. Just what Gandalf had said would happen, you see. Perhaps that was part of his reason for going off and leaving them. Bilbo, however, did not feel nearly as hopeful as they did. He did not like being depended on by everyone, and he wished he had the wizard at hand. But that was no use. Probably all the dark distance of Mirkwood lay between them. He sat and thought, until his head nearly burst, but no bright idea would come. One invisible ring was a very fine thing, but it was not much good among 14. But of course, as you have guessed, he did rescue his friends in the end, and this is how it happened. One day, nosing and wandering about, Bilbo discovered a very interesting thing. The gates were not the only entrance to the caves. A stream flowed under part of the lowest regions of the palace and joined the forest river, some way further to the east, beyond the steep slope out of which the main mouth opened. Where this underground watercourse came forth from the hillside, there was a water gate. There the rocky roof came down close to the surface of the stream, and from it a portcullis could be dropped right to the bed of the river to prevent anyone coming in or out that way. But the portcullis was often open, for a good deal of traffic went in and out by the water gate. If anyone had come in that way, he would have found himself in a dark, rough tunnel leading deep into the heart of the hill. But at one point, where it passed under the caves, the roof had been cut away and covered with great oaken trapdoors. These opened upwards to the king's cellars. There stood barrels and barrels and barrels, for the Wood Elves, and especially their king, were very fond of wine, though no vines grew in those parts. The wine and other goods were brought from far away, from their kinsfolk in the south, or from the vineyards of men in distant lands. Hiding behind one of the largest barrels, Bilbo discovered the trap doors and their use, and lurking there, listening to the talk of the king's servants, he learned how the wine and other goods came up the rivers, or overland, to the long lake. It seemed a town of men still throve there, built out on bridges far into the water as a protection against enemies of all sorts, and especially against the dragon of the mountain. From Lake Town, the barrels were brought up the forest river. Often they were just tied together like big rafts and poled or rowed up the stream. Sometimes they were loaded onto flat boats. When the barrels were empty, the elves cast them through the trap doors, opened the water gate, and out the barrels floated on the stream, bobbing along, until they were carried by the current to a place far down the river where the bank jutted out, near to the very eastern edge of Mirkwood. There they were collected and tied together and floated back to Lake Town, which stood close to the point where the forest river flowed into the long lake. For some time, Bilbo sat and thought about this water gate, and wondered if it could be used for the escape of his friends, and at last he had the desperate beginnings of a plan. The evening meal had been taken to the prisoners. The guards were tramping away down the passages like taking the torchlight with them, and leaving everything in darkness. Then Bilbo heard the king's butler bidding the chief of the guards good night. "Now come with me," he said, "and taste the new wine that has just come in. I shall be hard at work tonight, clearing the cellars of the empty wood. So let us have a drink first, to help the labor." "Very good," laughed the chief of the guards. "I'll taste with you and see if it is fit for the king's table. There is a feast tonight, and it would not do to send up poor stuff." Let me take a break here really quickly. I need some water. Oh yeah. You can't send bad wine up to the king. No, all needs to be taste tested. Every barrel. Twice. Gotta test it twice. Thoroughly. Two glasses from each barrel. Minimum. Such lushes. But hey, elves can enjoy wine as much as any other creature in Middle-earth. Alrighty. When he heard this, Bilbo was all in a flutter, for he saw that luck was with him, and he had a chance at once to try his desperate plan. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which 2 large flagons were set. Soon they began to drink and laugh merrily. Luck of an unusual kind was with Bilbo then. It must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy. But this wine, it would seem, was the heady vintage of the great gardens of Dorwinion. Not meant for his soldiers or his servants, but for the king's feasts only, and for smaller bowls, not for the butler's great flagons. It's meant to be like port. Just take a little tiny goblet of it, like a cordial glass worth. He's got like a huge pint flagon. And they're like, these elves getting sloshed. Very soon the chief guard nodded his head, and he laid it on the table and fell fast asleep. The butler went on talking and laughing to himself for a while without seeming to notice, but soon his head, too, nodded to the table, and he fell asleep and snored beside his friend. Gonna get in so much trouble. Then in crept the Hobbit. Very soon the chief guard had no keys, but Bilbo was trotting as fast as he could along the passages toward the cells. The great bunch seemed very heavy to his arms, and his heart was often in his mouth, in spite of his ring, for he could not prevent the keys from making every now and then a loud clink and clank, which put him all in a tremble. First he unlocked Balin's door, and locked it again carefully as soon as the dwarf was outside. Balin was most surprised, as you can imagine, but glad as he was to get out of his wearisome little stone room. He wanted to stop and ask questions, and know what Bilbo was going to do, and all about it. "No time now," said the Hobbit. You just follow me. We must all keep together and not risk being separated. All of us must escape, or none. This is our last chance. If this is found out, goodness knows where the king will put you next. With chains on your hands and feet, too, I expect. Don't argue. There's a good fellow." Then off he went from door to door, until his following had grown to 12, none of them any too nimble, what with the dark and what with their long imprisonment. Bilbo's heart thumped every time one of them bumped into another, or grunted or whispered in the dark. "Drat this elvish racket," he said to himself. But all went well, and they met no guards. As a matter of fact, there was a great autumn feast in the woods that night, and in the halls above. Nearly all the king's folk were merrymaking. At last, after much blundering, they came to Thorin's dungeon, far down in a deep place, and fortunately not far from the cellars. "Upon my word," said Thorin when Bilbo whispered to him to come out and join his friends. "Gandalf spoke true, as usual. A pretty fine burglar you make, it seems, when the time comes. I am sure we are all forever at your service, whatever happens after this, but what comes next?" Bilbo saw that the time had come to explain his idea as far as he could, but he did not feel at all sure how the dwarves would take it. His fears were quite justified, for they did not like it a bit and started grumbling loudly in spite of their danger. "We shall be bruised and battered to pieces, and drowned too, for certain," they muttered. "We thought you had got some sensible notion when you managed to get hold of the keys. This is a mad idea." "Very well," said Bilbo, very downcast and also rather annoyed. "Come along back to your nice cells, and I will lock you all in again, and you can sit there uncomfortably and think of a better plan. But I don't suppose I shall ever get a hold of the keys again, even if I feel inclined to try." That was too much for them, and they calmed down. In the end, of course, they had to do just as Bilbo suggested, because it was obviously impossible for them to try and find their way into the upper halls, or to fight their way out of the gates that closed by magic. And it was no good grumbling in the passages until they were caught again. So following the hobbit down into the lowest cellars they crept. They passed a door through which the chief guard and the butler could still be seen, happily snoring with smiles on their faces. The wine of Dorwinion brings deep and pleasant dreams. There would be a different expression on the face of the chief guard the next day, even though Bilbo, before they went on, stole in and kind-heartedly put the keys back on his belt. "That will save him from some of the trouble he's in for," said Mr. Baggins to himself. "He wasn't a bad fellow, and quite decent to the prisoners. It will puzzle them all, too. They will think we had a very strong magic to pass through those locked doors and disappear. Disappear! We have got to get busy very quick if that is to happen." I need another drink. I just have water. I don't have wine from Dorwinion. Does the Silmarillion talk about Legolas's mom at all? No. None of the books do. I've looked thoroughly. To my knowledge, there's really no note of Legolas's mother. Common fandom, fandom has made her Sylvan elf rather than a Sindar elf. So King Thranduil married one of the locals. This is again headcanon from fandom. This is fandom talking. Often fandom also decides that she's dead, which is cruel, but because she's not mentioned, that's what everyone just assumes, that she existed, obviously, for Legolas to exist, but that she's no longer there for whatever reason. Most often she was killed in a spider attack, and that's just what fandom sort of accepts as being likely the truth. It makes sense, but it's a very, very dreary thing. I took it a step further, and I made her die while she was pregnant. So, yet another reason for Thranduil to be as cruel as he can be, as bitter and easy to rage as he can be, and why the elves have zero mercy on the spiders, because they killed the queen. They killed the queen, man. So again, that's all just headcanon, but no, it's not mentioned in the Silmarillion or any of the other books what happened to Legolas's mother and who she was. Do well to make sure it's not poisoned, right? Okay, let's continue. We still got a little ways to go here. Because we're going to page 170, we're currently on 163. So we're making progress, we'll get there. Probably about halfway through this chapter. Balin was told off to watch the guard and the butler and give warning if they stirred. The rest went into the adjoining cellar with the trap doors. There was little time to lose. Before long, as Bilbo knew, some elves were under orders to come down and help the butler get the empty barrels through the doors into the stream. These were in fact already standing in rows in the middle of the floor waiting to be pushed off. Some of them were wine barrels, and these were not of much use, as they could not easily be opened at the end without a great deal of noise, nor could they easily be secured again. But among them were several others, which had been used for bringing other stuffs, butter, apples, all sorts of things, to the king's palace. They soon found 13 with room enough for a dwarf in each. In fact, some were too roomy, as they climbed in and the dwarves thought anxiously of the shaking and the bumping that they would get inside, though Bilbo did his best to find straw and other stuff to pack them in as cozily as could be managed in a short time. At last 12 dwarves were stowed. Thorin had given a lot of trouble, and turned and twisted in his tub, and grumbled like a large dog in a small kennel, while Balin, who came last, made a great fuss about his air holes and said he was stifling, even before his lid was on. Bilbo had done what he could to close those holes in the sides of the barrels, and to fix on all the lids as safely as could be managed. Brain. And now he was left alone again, running round, putting the finishing touches to the packing, and hoping against hope that this plan would come off. It had not been done a bit too soon. Only a minute or two after Balin's lid had been fitted on, there came a sound of voices and the flicker of lights. A number of elves came laughing and talking into the cellars and singing snatches of song. They had left a merry feast in one of the halls and were bent on returning as soon as they could. "Where's old Gallion the butler?" said one. "I haven't seen him at the stables. Haven't seen. He probably would be snackered, wouldn't he? I haven't seen him at the table tonight." "Where's old Gallion the butler?" said one. "I haven't seen him at the tables tonight. He ought to be here now to show us what is to be done." "I shall be angry if the old slow coach is late," said another. "I have no wish to waste time down here while the song is up." "Ha ha!" came a cry. "Here's the old villain with his head on a jug. He's been having a little feast all to himself and his friend the captain." "Shake him! Wake him!" shouted the others impatiently. Gallion was not at all pleased at being shaken or wakened, and still less at being laughed at. "You're all late," he grumbled. "Here I am waiting and waiting down here, while you fellows drink and make merry and forget your tasks. Small wonder if I fall asleep from weariness." "Small wonder," said they, when the explanation stands close at hand in a jug. "Come give us a taste of your sleeping draught before we fall to. No need to wake the turnkey yonder. He has had his share by the looks of it." So they only managed to get the butler awake, not the chief of the guards. Then they drank once round and became mighty merry all of a sudden. But they did not quite lose their wits. "Save us, Gallion!" cried some. "You began your feasting early and muddled your wits. You have stacked some full casks here instead of the empty ones. If there's anything in weight..." Basically, based on the weight of these barrels, they're like, "These ones are full, they're supposed to be empty. What were you thinking?" "Get on with the work," growled the butler. There is nothing in the feeling of weight in an idle tosspot's arms. These are the very ones to go, and no others. Do as I say." Very well, they answered, rolling the barrels to the opening. "On your head be it if the king's full butter tubs and his best wine is pushed into the river for the lake men to feast on for nothing." Roll, 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 rolling down the hole. Heave-ho, splash, plump. Down they go, down they bump. Thus sang the elves. So they sang, as first one barrel and then another rumbled to the dark opening and was pushed over into the cold water, some feet below. Some were barrels really empty, some were tubs neatly packed with a dwarf each, but down they all went, one after another, with many a splash and a bump. thudding on top of ones below, smacking into the water, jostling against the walls of the tunnel, knocking into one another, and bobbing away down the current. It was just at this moment that Bilbo suddenly discovered the weak point in his plan. Most likely you saw it some time ago and have been laughing at him, but I don't suppose you would have done half as well yourselves in his place. Of course, he was not in a barrel himself, nor was there anyone to pack him in, even if there had been a chance. It looked as if he would certainly lose his friends this time. Nearly all of them had already disappeared through the dark trap door, and get utterly left behind and have to stay lurking as a permanent burglar in the elf caves forever. For even if he could have escaped through the upper gates at once, he had precious small chance of ever finding the dwarves again. He did not know the way by land to the place where the barrels were collected. He wondered what on earth would happen to them without him, for he had not had time to tell the dwarves all that he had learned, or what he had meant to do once they were out of the wood. While all these thoughts were passing through his mind, the elves, being very merry, began to sing a song round the river door. Some had already gone to haul on the ropes which pulled up the portcullis at the water gate, so as to let out the barrels as soon as they were all afloat below. Here we go with another song. Brace yourselves. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to lands you once did know. Leave the halls and caverns deep, leave the northern mountains steep, where the forest wide and dim stoops in shadow gray and grim. Float beyond the world of trees out into the whispering breeze, past the rushes, past the reeds, past the marshes' waving weeds. Through the mist that riseth white up from mare and pool at night, follow, follow stars that leap up the heavens cold and steep. Turn when dawn comes over land, over rapid, over sand, south away and south away, seek the sunlight of the day. Back to pasture, back to mead, where the kine and oxen feed. Back to gardens on the hills, where the berry swells and fills under sunlight, under day. South away and south away. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to the lands you once did know. I'm sure that would be a fun little tune. But, I mean, they're drunk. Give them a break, okay? They're all drunk. Now the very last barrel was being rolled to the doors. In despair, and not knowing what else to do, poor little Bilbo caught hold of it and was pushed over the edge with it. Down into the water he fell, splash! Into the cold, dark water, with the barrel on top of him. He came up again sputtering and clinging to the wood like a rat, but for all his efforts he could not scramble on top. Every time he tried, the barrel rolled around and dunked him under again. It was really empty, and floated light as a cork. Though his ears were full of water, he could hear the elves still singing in the cellar above. Then suddenly the trapdoors fell with a boom, and their voices faded away. He was in the dark tunnel, floating in icy water, all alone, for you cannot count friends that are all packed up in barrels. Very soon a gray patch came in the darkness ahead. Pardon me. He heard the creak of the water gate being hauled up, and he found that he was in the midst of a bobbing and bumping mass of casks and tubs all pressing together to pass under the arch and get out into the open stream. He had as much as he could do to prevent himself from being hustled and battered to bits. But at last the jostling crowd began to break up and swing off, one by one, under the stony archway. Under the stony arch and away. Then he saw that it would have been no good even if he had managed to get astride his barrel, for there was no room to spare, not even for a hobbit, between its top and the suddenly stooping roof where the gate was. Out they went under the overhanging branches of the trees on either bank. Bilbo wondered what the dwarves were feeling, and whether a lot of water was getting into their tubs. Some of those that bobbed along by him in the gloom seemed pretty low in the water, and he guessed that these had dwarves inside. "I do hope I put the lids on tight enough," he thought. But before long he was worrying too much about himself to remember the dwarves. He managed to keep his head above the water, but he was shivering with the cold, and he wondered if he would die of it before the luck turned. And how much longer he would be able to hang on, and whether he should risk the chance of letting go and trying to swim to the bank. The luck turned all right before long. The eddying current carried several barrels close ashore at one point, and there, for a while, they stuck against some hidden root. Then Bilbo took the opportunity of scrambling up the side of his barrel while it was held steady against another. He crawled like a drowned rat, and lay on top, spread out to keep the distance as best he could. The breeze was cold, but better than the water, and he hoped he would not suddenly roll off again when they started off once more. Before long, the barrels broke free again and turned and twisted off down the stream, and out into the main current. Then he found it quite as difficult to stick on as he had feared, but he managed it somehow, though it was miserably uncomfortable. Luckily, he was very light. The barrel was a good big one, and being rather leaky, and now shipped in a small amount of water. Had now shipped a small amount of water. All the same, it was like trying to ride, without bridle or stirrups, a round-bellied pony that was always thinking of rolling on the grass. In this way, at last, Mr. Baggins came to a place where the trees on either hand grew thinner. He could see the paler sky between them. The dark river opened suddenly wide, and there it was joined to the main river of the Forest River, the main water of the Forest River, flowing down in haste from the king's great doors. There was a dim sheet of water no longer overshadowed, and on its sliding surface there were dancing and broken reflections of clouds and of stars. Then the hurrying water of the Forest River swept all the company of casks and tubs away to the north bank, in which it had eaten out a wide bay. This had a shingly shore under hanging banks, and was walled at the eastern end by a little jutting cape of hard rock. On the shallow shore most of the barrels ran aground, though a few went on to bump against the stony pier. There were people on the lookout on the banks. They quickly pulled and pushed all the barrels together into the shadows, and when they had counted them, they roped them together and left them till morning. Poor dwarves! Bilbo was not badly off now. He slipped from his barrel and waded ashore, and then sneaked along to some huts that he could see near the water's edge. He no longer thought twice about picking up a supper uninvited if he got the chance, and he had been obliged to do it for so long, and he knew now only too well that it was what it was to be really hungry. I'll try that sentence again in a moment. I know, poor Bilbo, he's gonna get a chill. I mean, to be fair, this is probably... I would assume this is equinox. This is like the autumn equinox. If there's a great feast and the elves do things by stars and stuff. It was probably an equinox. So, it's bound to be pretty cold. This is relatively northern in Middle-earth at the time, so probably pretty cold water, not gonna lie. Alright. He no longer thought twice about picking up a supper uninvited if he got the chance. He had been obliged to do it for so long, and he knew now only too well what it was to be really hungry, not merely politely interested in the dainties of a well-filled larder. Also, he had caught a glimpse of a fire through the trees, and that appealed to him with his dripping and ragged clothes clinging to him cold and clammy. There's no need to tell you much of his adventures that night, for now we are drawing near to the end of the eastward journey and coming to the last and greatest adventure, so we must hurry on. Of course, helped by his magic ring, he got on very well at first, but he was given away in the end by wet footsteps, and the trail of drippings that he left wherever he went or sat. And also he began to snivel, and wherever he tried to hide, he was found out by the terrific explosions of his suppressed sneezes. Very soon there was a fine commotion in the village by the riverside, but Bilbo escaped into the woods carrying a loaf and a leather bottle of wine and a pie that did not belong to him. The rest of the night he had to pass wet, as he was, and far from a fire, but the bottle helped him to do that, and he actually dozed a little on some dry leaves, even though the year was getting late and the air was chilly. He woke again with a specially loud sneeze. It was already gray morning, and there was a merry racket down by the river. They were making up a raft of barrels, and the raft elves would soon be steering it off down the stream to Lake Town. Bilbo sneezed again. He was no longer dripping, but he felt cold all over. He scrambled down as fast as his stiff legs would take him and managed just in time to get onto the massive casks without being noticed in the general bustle. Luckily, there was no sun at the time to cast an awkward shadow, and for a mercy he did not sneeze again for a good while. There was a mighty pushing of poles. The elves that were standing in the shallow water heaved and shoved. The barrels, now all lashed together, creaked and fretted. "This is a heavy load," some grumbled. "They float too deep. Some of these are never empty." Some of these are never empty. If they had come ashore in the daylight, we might have had a look inside, they said. "No time now," cried the raftman. "Shove off." And off they went at last, slowly at first, until they had passed the point of rock where other elves stood to fend them off with poles, and then quicker and quicker as they caught the main stream and went sailing away down towards the lake. They had escaped the dungeons of the king, and were through the wood, but whether alive or dead still remains to be seen. And thus ends chapter 9. There also is one illustration. There's one illustration that I can show off, so hopefully this will work. Okay. Hey, it did work. Cool. So this is the Elven King's Gate. And I did actually buy a version of The Hobbit that has more illustrations in it, an actual illustrated edition, rather than one that just has a couple here and there. So I did buy one. If you guys would like to see the illustrations of the other version, I'll bring that out next week. And we'll catch up on the ones that we've missed. But I do now have a version that does have more illustrations in it. So there we go. And for anyone who happens to be on TikTok, it's this one. Nothing too special, because this is a relatively old version. This was published in 2001, maybe? Question mark? When was this edition published? Um, 1997. This was published 1997. So it's a bit of an older version. I've had this version for ages. This is the version I've read more than once. So yeah, next week I'll make sure to bring out the other version, and we'll catch up on the various illustrations that we've missed. So we are now on page 170, chapter 10, which will be done next week. So we finally got them through Mirkwood. We've gotten through Mirkwood. We're done with the elves for now. There's only one elf that goes named in there. You might have noticed. I think that was one of the trivia questions for the trivia competition between Knew Better, Do Better, and Lore Nerd. because it was just Galleon, I believe. It was Galleon, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was Galleon. So Galleon is the only elf mentioned in the book, the only mentioned by name. The Elven King is just called the Elven King instead of Thranduil. But it is Legolas's father, and Legolas was probably present for some of this. Probably going out with those hunting parties and stuff. That would make sense. If Thranduil himself was going out on these hunting parties, which is the impression that they give in this book, Legolas was probably going with him. Or they went out at different times to make sure that just in case something happened to Thranduil, he would have a son at the ready to survive. So let's see. I want to double check really quickly what we will be covering next week because I already portioned this out. I just need to put it together. We will have, I think, 2 more weeks. I think we have 2 more weeks of The Hobbit. But let me double check really quickly. Okay. 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks of The Hobbit. So today was part 4. We did chapters 8 and 9. Next week will be chapters 10 through 12, so we'll do 3 chapters next week. And then 13 through 16 and 17 through 19. So 3 more weeks of The Hobbit. Which will take us to... Let me look at the calendar. Okay, so we'll do the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th. So that actually ends up being perfect for me because the 22nd, the Wednesday after that, my father is having knee surgery, so I probably won't be able to stream. So that ends up being perfect timing. We'll finish The Hobbit right when we need to in order for me to take a week off to help my dad with his surgery. So that works out very well. Very well indeed. Let's see. So we also started the Lay of Lathian last week, so we have 4 more weeks of that, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We'll end the 18th will be the last day for the Lay of Lathian on Saturdays. So we're actually going to finish both books the same week. Score! And then I'll probably take a week off in order to help my dad, and following that we will start on The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I love that I planned this so well. I did a good job. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Let me see if there's anything here. I have a question. Why is Finrod's hair too short in the teaser trailer? Is there any explanation? Hair length is completely subjective. Basically, depending on the adaptation that you're looking at, the elves have long hair, they don't. Peter Jackson is just the version that everyone's used to now because it's been around for 20 years, and it was revolutionary when it came out. So Peter Jackson's version of Middle-earth has the elves all long-haired. Canonically, I think hair length is pretty much like only mentioned when the elf's hair happens to be very long, and that has always happened with female elves in the books. I would have to double check that, but I don't believe they give like a very specific hair length for a lot of male elves. So Peter Jackson just sort of decided that he was going to make all of them long-haired, and he just made them super androgynous. He also did so with kind of, a cackle being like, it's like they're wearing their sister's clothes. And I'm like, fuck you. Like, he didn't have to get derisive about it, but he did. So he thought it was almost, like, funny in a demeaning way to have all of the elves be long-haired and effeminate. I loved it because being non-binary, being queer, this was a perfect fit for me. Someone, I grew out my hair, and I had my hair down to my ass at one point. And I took my senior pictures with long hair in a gown that had elvish embroidery on it that I designed. I'm that geek. My mom did silver-threaded embroidery for me. And I know that was a labor of love because it gave her so much trouble. But yeah, I do... Gosh, do I have it? I'm gonna check. I'm gonna check and see if I have it readily available. I think I have my dress. Let me look. I do indeed have it. Okay, so this was my junior prom dress. My junior prom. So, I designed it. So this was my junior prom dress. I definitely don't fit in this bitch anymore. I've gained probably 60 pounds? 60 pounds since I fit in this bitch. But that's it. Silver embroidery. With the leaf symbol and everything. But yeah, I designed that. And then my mom's friend made the dress and my mom did the embroidery herself. It's lovely. With extra long sleeves. So the sleeves open up on the side so that they drape down like that from the shoulder. So that's my junior prom dress. I haven't gotten any taller. It still fits lengthwise, which is kind of embarrassing. I haven't grown vertically, I've only grown horizontally. Woo, woo. Slippery little sucker. Okay. So there's my show and tell for the week. It really is a lovely dress. What's funny is that my mom has actually slimmed down quite a lot in the last, 2 years, and now she fits in the dress. My mom fits in it. I don't. I think that's funny and kind of awesome. Good job, Mom. But, yeah. Trying to get better about my eating habits, but, stress and pandemic, and I eat my feelings, okay? So I do not and have not fit in this dress for quite a long time, but it is a lovely dress, and I did design the embroidery. I also made my own diadem out of, bending metal. It wasn't super high quality, but I made it. It was something I did. This was one of the many outfits that I wore when I would cosplay elves to go see the movies. That's where I actually got my elf boy name that I do here. This is back before... Yeah, basically. This was before I knew that I was queer, kind of. I knew that I wasn't straight. I'll put it that way. I knew I wasn't straight, but I didn't understand the concept of gender identity, gender expression, any of that. Did not understand it. All I knew is that the elves were my ideal. And I didn't know that that made me trans, or gender fluid, or non-binary. I didn't know any of those terms, so this is back before shit was talked about. So at that time, when I would dress up and do all of my stuff at the movie theater, the newspaper in my town started calling me the elf chick, like the local elf chick, because at that time I was starting to learn Elvish. I had learned the writing. I had learned the Tengwar at that point. And I would wear sometimes feminine stuff like this, feminine stuff, and then other times I would dress like a warrior, and I had my bow and a quiver full of arrows, which they allowed in the movie theater as long as they didn't have tips on them, as if that would keep it from hurting someone a lot, but, whatever. There were no tips on my arrows. And I cosplayed. I cosplayed almost every time I went to see the movie. I used super glue and pinched my ears together into points so that they looked natural. And I felt fabulous. I did, you know, all these ornate braids in my hair and everything. The whole thing. It was so much fun. But that got me known citywide as the elf chick. And so now that I don't identify as a chick, I changed it to elf boy. I changed it to elf boy. But everybody was always like, yeah, you're an elf, it's fine. From like high school on. I was either that or I was, you know, some sort of pixie. Elf dude! Elf bra! The elf bra. I don't have the swagger. Or honestly the skin tone to use something like elf bra. Because it either goes far toward like the surfer dude, like, what? Surfer bro, the elf bro, shaw. It either goes far that extreme or like more AAVE. The more African American slang, and I'm definitely not African American, not even close. So, being elf bruh doesn't jive. It doesn't jive with my brain. But certainly elf boy. I was always joking with my friends in high school that I wanted to find my elf boy. Like, my true love, my elf boy. He didn't have to be Legolas. He didn't have to be. But if it had been Legolas, I would not have turned it down, okay? In college, I actually did meet a boy that I was like, oh my god, you're tall and you have long hair and you have a British accent, you're totally a fucking elf, and I dated him. I did date him. Not for very long. Just, it was a confusing time. But, let's just put it this way. There were things he wanted in the relationship I was not prepared to give. And so we just mutually agreed this was not gonna work for him. And we remained friends. We remained friends, and he had his fun, and good for him. But he was a very sweet guy. His name was Fraser Walker. He was a British exchange student. Go figure. He was a sweet guy, though. And at least we communicated. Like, he never cheated on me or did anything, like, really mean. He was a good guy. But he was just very clear about, hey, I think I like someone and I want them. And I was like, well, then I guess we're stopping, huh? Because at the time, polyamory hadn't entered my radar. I didn't know what that meant. Saruman the wannabe Gandalf. But yeah, he was a sweet guy. He was a sweet guy, and we parted on good terms. Hope he's okay. He was really worried that he was just gonna return to the UK and end up at a desk job for the rest of his life. He was like, I have a history degree. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do with that? And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, maybe you can help curate something at a museum or something. Like, pick a very, very specific niche and go with it. But I don't know what he did. I don't know what he did after those couple of semesters he spent in the US. He disappeared off the radar. I think we contacted each other maybe 6 months after he left, just once, to be like, hey, how's it going? It's going good. And then just nothing. So, I hope he turned out okay. I hope he had a good life so far. He deserved one. He was a nice guy. Things didn't work out between us, but he was a nice guy. He was the first person I watched Firefly with, too. That was fun. Both of us had never seen it before, so that was, like, totally a bonding experience. We got to geek out and like, enjoy our first watch-through of Firefly together. I miss Fraser. He was a good guy. And super geeky. He loved the whole cosplay things. Like, both of us would cosplay. Like, we were compatible in general. It was a really, really fun time. Sauron is the elven BFF, the best frenemy forever. I mean, that's pretty accurate. Sauron is the type who would deceive you into, you know, like, into thinking that he is your best friend, and then turn on you. Because that canonically happened with Celebrimbor. So, absolutely. Absolutely accurate to me. But that's pretty much it for today. We're coming up on 3 hours. It was a longer than normal stream. I think we had a few more pages than typical. But we have 3 more weeks for The Hobbit, and 4 more weeks, including this week, 4 more weeks of The Lays of Beleriand. So we'll actually finish both of those right before I have to go out of town. Works out well. I will also be making plenty more content over on TikTok. I have a bunch more videos that I need to film that'll hopefully get filmed in the next day or 2. Yeah, there's a lot more, because we're still on the prologue. It's going to take me a while to get through all of my ideas for lore and stuff that you guys can learn from me as we go chronologically through the movies, through the Peter Jackson movies. Isn't it fanon that they have something more, Sauron and Celebrimbor? It is fanon. Tolkien never states outright how deep their relationship went. But he does say that they worked very closely with each other, and that Sauron was basically like a mentor to him, as Anatar. And yeah, just that, I'm trying to remember the exact wording. I can't remember the exact wording, but I think at some point, he uses either ensnared or enchanted. It's not bespelled. But just that Celebrimbor was taken. Like, he was taken with him. And whether that's just a completely neutral term, or was meant to imply something more sensual, we don't know. We don't know. Because even with a precise word choice, there's subtext, right? And that's up for interpretation. It's all subjective. So, maybe? It's very common for fandom to think so. Not just me, and not just because I'm queer. There are just certain characters that read really queer if you are coming from that lens. Anatar and Celebrimbor are one of them. Beleg, Cuthalion, and Turin Turambar are another one. And then Frodo and Sam. So could these things have just been platonic? Or romantic without being sexual? Absolutely. And I would have no problem with that. But Tolkien never said one way or another, so us fans fill in the blanks. Just like Tolkien did. Tolkien wrote fan fiction. That's what Clervaux is. It's just fan fiction. It's his version, his take on an older myth. So if even Tolkien is writing fan fiction, I think people can relax about fandom taking an idea and running with it. Like, there is some truly off-the-wall fandom shit. But there's stuff that makes sense canonically. And it makes sense for Sauron and Celebrimbor to have some sort of relationship. However deep you want to take that. However dark you want to make that. We don't know too much about Celebrimbor's personality. We know that he broke from the ranks of the Feanorians. When Curufin and Celegorm basically imprisoned Luthien, when they imprisoned her and wanted to force her to marry them. To marry one of them. When they did that, Celebrimbor disapproved. And he broke with them. He was just like, that's too far. Hell no. And when they were then exiled from Nargothrond, he did not go with them. He didn't speak up for them. He was like, yeah, they went too far. I'm done with that. Done with that noise. That's my dad and uncle, and I'm done. But there's also a different version of Celebrimbor where he lived in Gondolin. And if he was in Gondolin, he wouldn't have been in Nargothrond at that same point in time. So, things get a little confusing. And I don't know which version they will go with in this particular adaptation, so we'll have to see. But other than him being like, okay, that was a step too far, like, not cool, bro. And he didn't back any of his uncles when they were attacking Doriath or at the havens of Sirion. Like, he did not partake in any of the kinslaying, to our knowledge, because he had broken off from the ranks. and he's never named as specifically having done anything at the previous kinslaying over in Aqualonde. So we don't know. Other than that, we don't really know. Personality wise. So you could play him being really power hungry. You could play him as a character seeking redemption for his family, like on all the Feanorians' behalfs, wanting to do something of great import in the Second Age as the only surviving member of his line. Maglor doesn't count. He was lost. So, Celebrimbor is the only active member of the Feanorian family in the Second and Third Ages. So he wanted to do something of great import, is a reasonable assumption. So him being power hungry is one way of playing it. Him being a sweet, soft cinnamon bun of a boy and being completely seduced and overpowered by Anatar, who's a very strong personality, also makes sense. So there are many ways that you can play it, but certainly it's a possibility. We'll see if they include it. I hope they do. We've seen the actor who's playing Celebrimbor. People were like, he's old, and I'm like, he should be the same visual age as Galadriel, because the two of them are about the same age, approximately the same age. They both came from Aman. They both are old elves, but at that point in time, they're about the same age. So I don't understand the reason for making Celebrimbor appear older, choosing an older actor, versus for Elrond and Galadriel, we have quite young actors. I don't know their reasoning, but I'm willing to see what they put together. I'm just super curious about what they have going on, and I'm excited to see it, and if I disapprove, I will rip it apart. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I really don't think it's going to be an issue. I think the showrunners do have a lot of respect for Tolkien's work, and so there will be certain departures, just like in Peter Jackson's films. There will definitely be departures, but I'm okay with having a different interpretation and judging it for what it is, and not just for what it isn't. So that's all I'll say on that. But I really do hope that Celebrimbor and Anatar are a thing in the Rings of Power, but we'll have to wait and see. If they want a queer representation in their promo team, hi, my name's Kris. I'm a non-binary / fluid trans boy who wants top surgery. Once again, on the subject of top surgery, once again, I will be putting out designs for Pride Month. If you are interested in Pride Month merch, please stay tuned. I'm finalizing those ideas tomorrow, and they will be available starting June. So we'll probably do a promo post of some sort on June 1st so that you guys know what I've designed and where you can get it. There will be 3 designs that I'll put out for Pride. One of them is geared towards asexual folk. One of them is just for anybody who's not straight, and the other is a general queer. So, all 3. The asexual one is just something that I felt compelled. So, hopefully you guys enjoy the designs. They're going to be relatively simple, but they'll be up on my Teespring shop, which everything is linked in my bio on TikTok. So, yeah, that's it. All proceeds will go toward top surgery. So, you are directly benefiting someone who is queer. I would love to get top surgery done, but that's certainly something that is not covered by insurance here in the US, so if anyone would like to help me, that is greatly appreciated. That said, we're gonna call it quits. I'm gonna put this dress away. Put this old-ass dress away. Gotta think, this is over 20 years old, and I still have it. It's like people keeping their wedding dresses. I'm like, yeah, I kept my high school dress because it had embroidery on it that I made, that I designed. But yeah, that's about it. Making sure I didn't miss any other questions. I'm glad you like the schedule that I've got going. But yeah, to tie up what you were asking about Finrod's hair, if that is Finrod in the image, which it probably is, that would be my best guess. just given his coloring and the broad shoulders. In that promotional image for the Rings of Power, why does he have short hair? He's never stated to specifically have long hair. Not really. I mean, maybe long enough to put flowers in or long enough to put braids in. But you don't have to have super long hair in order to braid it. So we'll see. We'll see. But again, it's silly to get so locked into one interpretation that you can't enjoy anything just because one thing is off. So I wouldn't worry too much about hair length when it comes to the new adaptation, because I think it's really going to run the gamut. I think some characters will have long hair, some characters will not. I think even the image that we had of Gil-galad, he had longer hair in the trailer. So I think it's just going to depend. And probably depend on functionality. So we'll see. But I'm keeping an open mind, and everybody else should too. We haven't seen it yet. Let's wait until it actually comes out, and then we can judge it. But that is all from me. Stay tuned for merch stuff. That will be happening in the next few days. And yeah, Pride Month is coming up. I'm excited. So I will see you guys on Saturday. Again, if I manage to get my shit together, I'll try and do an ASMR stream in here somewhere. I tried last night and then did not have the energy. So we'll try and do that over the next couple days, and I will see you guys back on Saturday for Silmarillion Saturday, where we cover the next portion of the Lay of Leithian, the story of Beren and Luthien in poetic form from the Lays of Beleriand. Everybody, please take care. I will see you guys next time. Bye! Bye, guys!